this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Wasabi is purpose-built to free your business from skyrocketing storage costs and fees. Wasabi is the go-to provider for professional and collegiate sports teams around the world. Check out Wasabi's AI-enabled intelligent media storage, Wasabi Air, to the industry's only cloud storage service with triple protection against cyber criminals. Wasabi, driving innovation in data storage for up to 80% less than market competition. Try for free at wasabi.com. Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage, proud partner of iHeart Podcast Network. Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1083 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Before I get to the topic today, I just want to send another reminder that the Late Round Prospect Guide is currently available for pre-order, and it's better than ever. This year's guide includes an outline of what goes into the models, prospect profiles for every running back, wide receiver, and tight end who's going to be at the combine, over 30 year 2 profile write-ups, rankings, and more. It'll launch in mid-March, so pre-order now for $14.99. It's going to rise to $19.99 in just a few weeks. You can learn more over on lateround.com. Last week on the show, we talked through running backs in this year's draft class who produce like studs. Because there's some backstory to all of that, if you haven't listened to that episode, I'd pause this one, go to that episode, listen to it, and then come back here. We're going to go through that exact same exercise today, but with wide receivers. We're going to look at successful NFL wide receivers, see what kind of production traits they shared in college, and then we'll see which players from this year's class, the guys invited to the combine, produce like studs. To find our stud sample at running back, I looked at all running backs since 2011 who had multiple seasons with 14 or more PPR points per game. I then had to filter out running backs who weren't in the ZAP model because I don't have data for them. Like I said, if you didn't listen to the running backs episode, you probably are missing some context. But I think most would appreciate if I didn't repeat everything that I said last week. Anyway, I'll do the same thing at wide receiver, but looking at 15 PPR point per game seasons. So I'll look at how many ZAP model wide receivers since 2011 had 15 or more PPR points per game in multiple seasons. Doing so gives me a stud sample of 35 wide receivers. They range from Puka Nacua to T. Higgins to Randall Cobb to Tyler Lockett to Julio Jones to Cooper Kupp. It's a little bit of everything. Now, the wide receiver ZAP model has a ton of inputs, but the main production input, it's a metric that I call breakout score. It's predictive, it's tested, and it's all driven off of a player's receiving yards per team pass attempt rate, which is a metric that's intuitive. It's just a player's receiving yards divided by how many pass attempts his team had. Essentially, breakout score looks at every season the player played in. It looks at the receiving yards per team pass attempt rate that a player had in a given season. It then prorates that for games missed. For a season to count, the wideout had to play at least 6 games. And then from there, it adjusts for strength of schedule. A player will get some multiplier, whether good or bad, based on his team's strength of schedule. Lastly, there's an age layer to it. A wide receiver who produces really well in schedule-adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt who's young, he's going to look better than someone who does the exact same thing when they're old. The degree in which that breakout happens, that's important too. You guys have probably seen the metric breakout age out there, and while there is some predictiveness to it, to me, it's just outdated. It's a binary way of looking at a breakout, and the metric that's being used in that metric in breakout age is dominator rating. Based on my research, that's not the best metric that you can use for age-adjusted production. Breakout scores on a scale from 0 to 100. 50 isn't exactly an average score or like a 50th percentile score, but just know that anything above that is pretty good. Anything in like the 80, 90 range, it's excellent. And for the record, the scaling for breakout score changed this year. The raw input in the model is the exact same, but I started to scale it a little bit differently for anyone who followed along last year. Now on today's show, I'll look at both breakout score and best season receiving yards per team pass attempt. Even though receiving yards per team pass attempt goes into breakout score, we'll see how these guys did in their best season in college, unadjusted for age, unadjusted for strength of schedule. Breakout score covers a lot of ground from a production standpoint within the ZAP model, but there's also an input for best season age and schedule adjusted fantasy points per game. That's just fantasy points per game adjusted for both strength of schedule and age. And that's in a season with a minimum 6 games played. We'll look at that metric too, even though it's not nearly as important in the model as breakout score. Within our stud sample of 35 wide receivers, the average breakout score was 68.1. The average best season receiving yards per team pass attempt was 3.03. And the average best season adjusted fantasy points per game, 25.1. Meanwhile, there were 46 wide receivers invited to the combine this year. Naturally, because all of those players aren't studs, their breakout score average is 31, significantly lower than the NFL stud sample. Their average best season yards per team pass attempt is 2.24. The stud sample was at 3.03. And their fantasy points per game, 16.2. Again, the stud sample, over 25. Each number is a whole lot lower than that stud average, but that's not a surprise. Now, I could just say, okay, here's who produced like a stud. Here's who hit all of the stud sample averages. But I think going through each metric and shouting out some players who do have some red flags within those metrics, that's helpful. That's useful. It also allows me to talk through this class as sort of a primer. So let's start with breakout score, the most important metric in the ZAP model, by far. The vast majority of this year's class is below that 68 mark from the NFL stud sample. But let's look at some names that are well below that, and who currently project as fairly high draft picks according to NFLMockDraftDatabase.com. I'll call out guys who are under the 40 mark in breakout score. And keep in mind, only Cooper Kupp, Michael Thomas, and Tyreek Hill had breakout scores that low in college in the stud NFL sample. And the only reason Kupp's was that low was because of strength of schedule adjustments. Now I've got 5 call-outs here. Let's start with Zachariah Branch. I'm not going to lie. I think Branch is the exact type of player that NFL teams get wrong all the time. He'll probably crush the combine this week. He'll see his draft capital rise. But there are a lot of red flags. He's a smaller wide receiver who played a lot of slot at both USC and Georgia. But he ended up with just a 31.2 breakout score. According to PFF data, almost 46% of his career targets came behind the line of scrimmage. If he goes in the top 100 picks, he'll be the 11th player drafted in that range since 2020 with a career behind the line of scrimmage target rate above 30%. Remember, he was almost at 46%. He'd be the first one over 40%. The players who he joined, you do have Wan'Dale Robinson and Luther Burden, but both of those players had breakout scores above 75. The other players are Lynn Bowden, Amari Rodgers, Anthony Schwartz, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore, Velus Jones, Trey Tucker, and Malachi Corley. Which, by the way, I just mentioned his name, but rest in peace, Rondale Moore. I, like many of you, have been thinking about that a lot since the news broke, and I hope his friends and family can find some calmness through what's just a straight-up tragedy. And it wouldn't be right for me to call out his name today and not recognize what happened over the weekend. It's just horrific. If anyone's struggling out there, please reach out and get some help. And my email is always open too. Now, it's hard to move on from a topic like that, but again, I couldn't just say his name and ignore the news. But let's shift our focus back to the research for this episode. Over 35% of Branch's career yards came on screens. Among top 100 picks since 2020, only 2 other wide receivers saw 30% of their career yardage totals come from screens: Malachi Corley and Anthony Schwartz. This is just a gadgety type archetype that's burned teams in the past. And it really, really scares me. History is not on Zachariah Branch's side. Now, another player who I probably like best from a value standpoint out of this group of 5 with bad breakout scores is Skylar Bell. He's an older prospect that's also a red flag. He's a little undersized, but he played both inside and out during his 5 years in college. He played at Wisconsin and then he transferred to UConn. And his perimeter yards per out run was actually better than his slot yards per out run. Now, Bell's breakout score is only about 22 because he didn't hit his peak until he got to UConn. But the ZAP model doesn't totally mind him because there's a little bit of versatility to his profile, and he should be able to align across the formation. The third player with a breakout score red flag is Malachi Fields. Fields has okay comps in the prospect guide and in the model, but I do have my concerns. His breakout score is 33.6. His best season in yards per route run ranks 34th among 46 wide receivers in this class. His career yards per route run is under 2 yards. I have this in the guide, but I'll just read it because it helps tell the analytical story here. It says, if Fields is selected on day 2 as projected, he'll need to buck recent history. Since 2020, only 9 wide receivers drafted between picks 33 and 100 posted the best season yards per route run below 2.3. Fields falls short of that threshold, as you just read. That group includes loads and loads of draft busts. Van Jefferson, Josh Palmer, Jonathan Mingo, Keon Coleman, Adonai Mitchell, Jalen Polk, Luke McCaffrey, Savion Williams, and Isaac Tesla. So chances are, if the market is aligned with draft capital with Fields, I'll be lower than the market. Next on this list of questionable breakout scores is Jacoby Lane. Now, he fortunately has early declare status in his favor, and he played with Mekhi Lemon, so his teammate score looks pretty good. More on Lemon later. But his breakout score is 35.9, that's below average. He's got a really long frame, he was first in this class in career contested target rate. Now, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but of the players who have been successful with that kind of contested target rate out of day 2 in the past, they've come with better breakout scores. I don't think Lane is a terrible prospect, but the age-adjusted production could definitely be better. And then lastly is Antonio Williams. NFL Mock Draft Database has Williams as a day 2 selection at the moment. And as I say in the guide, he just has a really weird production profile. He was consistently productive throughout his time at Clemson, but he never gave us a really high-end season. His breakout score was 38.4, despite the fact that he gave us some production immediately in college. His best season in receiving yards per team pass attempt, though, was never above 1.7. That's a problem. There have only been 7 ZAP model wideouts who hit 12 or more PPR points per game in one of their first 3 seasons with a max rate below 2.0. He's at 1.7. He's a versatile player, so not all hope is lost, and that's why Curtis Samuel was one of his early comps in the ZAP model. But it's not the kind of profile that I generally heavily invest in. Now, speaking of yards per team pass attempts, let's just focus on that metric now. Clearly, of the guys that I just talked about, they probably have that metric as a red flag too, because yards per team pass attempt feeds into breakout score. But there are 4 more players I want to talk about here. The first one's the biggest name of the group, and that's Casey Concepcion. To be very clear, first and foremost, the model likes Concepcion. I think he's a good prospect. There's a very real chance he gets the elite producer tag in that model if he ends up going where he's projected to go in the draft. He's an early declare, so he didn't get to play that final collegiate season. And that's a reason that his max season in yards per team pass attempt is 2.25. That's just the 20th best max season mark in the class. And as we know, it's well below the stud sample average. The stud sample only had 4 wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Randall Cobb, with a max season yards per team pass attempt as low as Concepcion's. Funny enough, the model thinks Randall Cobb is actually a pretty good comp for him. But the reason this doesn't matter that much for the ZAP model is because Concepcion produced every year of his collegiate career. So his breakout score, it ranks in the 76th percentile. There's no reason to be worried about this in my opinion, but it's worth the call out. Jeremy Bernard had a pretty similar receiving yards per team pass attempt as Concepcion. But Bernard didn't have the same early career success. He only really gave us strong production when he transferred to Alabama as a junior. Something kind of interesting about Bernard, though, from a production standpoint, is that he spent his sophomore year at Washington in 2023. If you recall, that was the season they had Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, and Denzel Boston, who's a 2026 draft hopeful, a potential first-round pick. On that team, with all that competition, Bernard caught 34 passes. Boston, for what it's worth, he caught 5. And Bernard had 13 rush attempts for 43 yards. It can't be a bad sign that he was seeing some production for that team. But overall, Bernard's profile isn't totally complete. He had a 1.9 career yards per route run rate. That's not what we want to see. And he saw a lot of targets behind the line of scrimmage. He can be pretty dynamic. You just have to question how that translates. I don't mind him right now, though. He's definitely someone to watch. And by the way, just as a total aside, today's analysis on the individual players, it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what the prospect guide actually offers. I'm just trying to touch on as many guys as quickly as I possibly can here. There's a ton more detail within that guide.
For adults with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis symptoms, every choice matters. Tremfya offers self-injection or intravenous infusion from the start. Tremfya is administered as injections under the skin or infusions through a vein every 4 weeks, followed by injections under the skin every 4 or 8 weeks. If your doctor decides that you can self-inject Tremfya, proper training is required. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active Crohn's disease and adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Explore what's possible. Ask your doctor about Tremfya today. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Innovation is what gets your business to the big leagues, and Wasabi is designed to give every business a shot at competition. Break free from skyrocketing storage costs and unpredictable egress fees from old and top-heavy legacy providers. Wasabi is the world's hottest cloud storage company and the go-to provider for professional and collegiate sports teams and leagues around the world, and here's why. Innovation. From Wasabi's AI-enabled intelligent media storage, Wasabi Air, to the industry's only cloud storage service with triple protection against cyber criminals, data deletion, and ransomware, Wasabi has taken the lead in big lead data storage. Remember, Wasabi is up to 80% less than market competition and doesn't charge a cent for businesses to access their own data. Wasabi, another championship story. Check them out for free at wasabi.com. Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage, proud partner of iHeart Podcast Network.
Okay, next on this list with yards per team pass attempt concerns is Ted Hurst. Not to be confused with Fred Durst. Hurst went to Georgia State. He's getting some love in the draft community, but the ZAP model isn't showing him the same kind of love. He had a top 10 deep ball rate in this class. He has a lot of length. I see him in sort of that Darius Slayton archetype. Another one could be like a Tez Walker in Baltimore. But he had an okay breakout score of 42, and it's kind of crazy that at Georgia State, his receiving yards per team pass attempt marks never got above 2.14. Only 3 wideouts from the stud sample were that low. I get the allure with a player like him, and maybe some of that big playability will translate, but I see him as pretty volatile. And then the last one to call out here is Omar Cooper, one of the Indiana guys. Cooper had an okay breakout score of 41.7, and his top year in yards per team pass attempt was just 2.31. Fortunately, though, that got boosted by strength of schedule. The model actually really likes him for his versatility. He's getting Deebo Samuel and Rashee Rice type comps. That shows that he might be good after the catch in the NFL. So it's a flag for Cooper, but I do like him. Now lastly, we have adjusted fantasy points per game in a player's top season. The stud average was over 25, and there are 2 guys, Chris Brazzell and Denzel Boston, who are under the 20 mark, albeit barely. Now this metric doesn't get a ton of love in the model, but I figured I'd just say what the model thinks about both these guys who have volatile profiles. Boston's probably more interesting to talk about because he's projected to go in round 1. But his breakout score was 43.8. And I have this in the prospect guide to give you guys some context about what that means for a first rounder, which is where he's currently projected to go. I wrote, within the ZAP model database, among wide receivers who played at least 3 NFL seasons, 12 were drafted in round 1 with a breakout score between 30 and 60, and Boston sits in the lower half of that band. That list includes Tavon Austin, Brashad Perriman, Kevin White, Philip Dorsett, Josh Doxson, Laquan Treadwell, John Ross, Mike Williams, Calvin Ridley, Henry Ruggs, Kadarius Toney, and Zay Flowers. So it's not great. I think Boston has a great deal of upside, but he also has a great deal of downside. On one end of the comp spectrum, you have Courtland Sutton. On the other, you have Kevin White. And then with Brazzell, the dude has a lot of length, and he can do work down the field. Though his production profile, it's solid. It's not like excellent. Just like Boston, we're seeing a wide range of comps. Christian Watson's the top one, but then Terrace Marshall and Denzel Mims, they also show up. Brazzell's pretty interesting. though I do always worry about production out of Tennessee, which is where he went to school. So those are the big callouts. I know I went through a lot of names, and I still have more that I didn't talk about. You're probably wondering which wide receivers met all 3 stud sample thresholds for these metrics. And I can tell you that only one wide receiver in this class hit all 3 of them. More on him in a second. First, a handful of names who didn't get there, who we didn't talk about yet. And just 1 or 2 things about each of these players. Mekhi Lemon. He's not that one player. He's not the guy who hit all 3 averages. The more I researched Lemon, the more I liked him. Some are going to call him a slot receiver. They're going to comp him to Amon-Ra St. Brown, which might partially be due to the fact that they both played at USC. I think ARSB, though, is not a bad comp because Lemon should be able to do what Amon-Ra St. Brown has done, which is play inside out in the NFL. Lemon ran more than 75% of his routes from the slot in college, but get this. Lemon posted the best career perimeter yards per route run rate in this year's class. That's according to PFF data. That's among all combine invites. Now that was on just 161 routes out wide, but I think that should give us a little bit more confidence about his transition to the NFL. The ZAP model likes Lemon. Now many would say there's a big 3 in this class with Lemon, Carnell Tate, and Jordan Tyson. One of those 3 is the winner here. And I'll talk about the other guy who's not towards the end. Instead, let's shift our focus to Elijah Surratt. What an incredibly interesting profile and journey for him. He started out at St. Francis as a 0-star recruit. He transferred to James Madison, and then he moved to Indiana with Coach Cignetti. And across his 3 non-St. Francis seasons, he had adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt rates between 2.58 and 2.75. Again, that's adjusted for strength of schedule. He's one of 3 wideouts in this class with multiple seasons above 2.5. And he's the only one with 3 seasons over that mark. He had a solid production profile across the board. The only questionable thing about his profile might be separation. He had a high contested target rate, which of day 2 wide receivers over the last 5 years, high contested target rates has just brought a lot of high variance results. It can range from the Terrace Marshall and Keon Coleman and Denzel Mims types to T. Higgins and Nico Collins. I'll probably be more in than out on Surratt. That's at least where I'm at right now. Chris Bell's another bigger bodied perimeter guy who didn't quite have numbers worthy enough calling out negatively on today's show, but they're not fantastic across the board either. His final season is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for him because he had a 2.59 yards per team pass attempt rate. When adjusted for strength of schedule, that translated to 2.72. But I'm telling you guys, these day 2 perimeter wide receivers with bigger frames, average to above average production profiles, they just give a lot of volatile outcomes. But Bell had an okay breakout score of 48. He's big. He should be able to play on the outside for a team in the NFL. He did tear his ACL, though, late in 2025. That makes his draft capital projection a lot more questionable. I don't totally mind him as a prospect, but I do like Surratt more. And then one random wide receiver to call out here, Eric McAllister. He went to TCU, and yes, TCU wide receivers have absolutely burned the crap out of us in fantasy football over the last 5 years or so. The nice part with McAllister is that we don't have to pay that much to acquire him, more than likely. And his breakout score is 75. That's the second best breakout score in this year's class. Of all the TCU wide receivers who have come out since 2020, we're talking Jalen Reagor, Darius Davis, Quentin Johnston, Savion Williams, Jack Besh. McAllister has the second best breakout score, only behind QJ, and it's barely behind QJ. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that within the model, and just in general, breakout score is far more predictive for early round picks than late round picks. I mean, even when you get to like round 5, round 6, draft capital itself isn't very predictive. So McAllister's age-adjusted production, it's really good. But we're going to want to see draft capital follow. And I don't think that's going to happen. Just keep an eye on him throughout this process. He's got a Torrey Horton comp, and I think the median outcome for him could be like a Cedric Wilson type. That's not a bad median outcome for a day 3 wide receiver. Okay, so after all of that, after me going through a ton of wide receivers, there are 2 obvious ones that I haven't talked about. Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson. One of those 2 did meet all of the averages within the stud sample. And it's not Carnell Tate. Tate's a really good prospect, though. He's a little bit thin. That scares me a little bit. And if you're comparing him to the other Ohio State wide receivers to come out over the last 5 years or so, his breakout score is lowest at 65.3. But 65.3 is still an 86th percentile number. He played strongly on the perimeter. That should help him stay on the field as a pro. And look, if he gets top 16 draft capital, we know the odds are really, really strong. He didn't force a ton of missed tackles per catch, but I think Tate is a really well-rounded wide receiver in this class. Jordan Tyson, he's him, according to the ZAP model. Tyson has a breakout score of 95. That's a 99th percentile breakout score. And it's because of his 2024 season, which was bonkers. His prorated receiving yards per team pass attempt was 3.36. That was adjusted even higher when adjusted for strength of opponent. And then when adjusted, his fantasy points per game was almost 26. I'll just share this tidbit from the prospect guide to give you an idea of how the model is viewing Tyson. It says, if Tyson lands as a top 20 selection as currently projected, he joined an exclusive group of 9 ZAP model wide receivers with a breakout score above 90 and top 20 draft capital. Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins, Amari Cooper, Corey Davis, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Malik Neighbors. So yes, we've seen some misses within that group, but that's a whole lot of studs. And CeeDee Lamb right now is Tyson's top statistical comp. I'm very likely going to have Jordan Tyson as the wide receiver 1 in this class. But that's not shade to some of the other guys. I think Carnell Tate and Mekhi Lemon are really good. And I understand that people don't want to put Tyson up there because he has injury concerns. Even Casey Concepcion, in my opinion, he kind of forms a tier below them. I think he's really good. And then I just think the sheer number of decent wide receivers in this class, maybe not analytically excellent, but decent, just the sheer number of them means that we're going to see hits from other guys in this group. It's a pretty good wide receiver class overall. I think dynasty managers should be relatively excited for it. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Remember to tune into the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF on Wednesday at noon Eastern. David Kitchen and myself, we're going to talk about year 2 wide receivers and some comps for those players. Otherwise, everyone, I'm back in your ears later this week for that show once it hits your podcast feed, but also another episode of Late Round Perspectives. I'll talk to you then.
Wasabi is purpose-built to free your business from skyrocketing storage costs and fees. Wasabi is the go-to provider for professional and collegiate sports teams around the world. Check out Wasabi's AI-enabled intelligent media storage, Wasabi Air, to the industry's only cloud storage service with triple protection against cyber criminals. Wasabi, driving innovation in data storage for up to 80% less than market competition. Try for free at wasabi.com. Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage, proud partner of the iHeart Podcast Network.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.